Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Many bullets, for example, 11 bullets into a child's body do. What's the impact of that?
It rips them apart. This is a horrible situation where the damage done is extensive.
And that's what happened to the children of your community?
Unfortunately, yes.
Pediatricians dropped what they were doing in the middle of a busy day.
Local paediatrician Dr. Greg Dworkin will never forget December 14th last year.
Also, because it's such a small town, we knew people at the school. We knew people who had kids at the school. Yeah. We had people in my own office who had people at the school.
At the district hospital, he and his colleagues frantically prepared for an influx of tiny patients. But none arrived. They had all died. When something like that happens in your community, do you feel sick to the core? Do you feel outraged? What's the visceral reaction?
Well, the first visceral reaction, I think, for everybody is shock. And frankly, that takes a long time to wear off. And only now, some of us are actually coming out of that fog and are starting to take a look and say, okay, this is what happened. And yes, there's anger, and yes, there's frustration, and also resolve, and a very, very strong sense of how can we look at the future and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Now local doctors want research to prove once and for all the facts related to gun deaths in America. What form would the research take? What do we need to know to be able to forward this debate then?
Well, for one thing, we would like to have a national gun registry of, not of people who own guns, but of people who are injured by guns, so that there's an injury registry, as has been done with many other illnesses. When you have the data as to who is injured, how and why, by whom, in what circumstance, then you can begin to analyze and get a sense of where the issues and where the problems are.
What the real truth of the gun is.
Research is number one. And the second tenet that we all came around to agreeing to, and this was not difficult, is support for mental health, making sure that people have both the funds and the access. And we want the workers, the mental health workers who work with patients, to be properly protected so that they could find the right balance between confidentiality and safety.
You don't ever want to see another Sandy Hook situation ever again. To be able to achieve that, surely the situation, the data, you would hope, would show that there's no need for everyone to have a gun.
We will go where the data takes us.
That's a diplomatic answer. That's a political answer.
But it's the only answer. In other words, you really have to have a fact-based, evidence-based approach to this. And if the data really say that, then I think that we and the public will follow. But you need the data.
Well, if the data came up and said guns are perfectly safe in all hands...
with the Second Amendment, that would be an argument to leave things be. I don't think that that's what it will show. But data's data, It's if you're serious about doing the research and following where the data goes, then you're serious about doing research and following where the data goes. It's not that we have an agenda and we want to produce the data to agree with us, just the opposite.
Well, it'd be shocking to learn that this is as safe as it gets.
It would be shocking to learn, and I would expect that the data would lead us elsewhere, but we'll see.
It is Thursday, the 22nd of March of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. That's right. It could be a little bit of spice or a little bit of jambalaya in your life. And why not? Why not? Well, 5 years ago, our good friend, Dr. Greg Dworkin, asked that we be allowed to study the gun issue and follow the data. Just simply follow the data. 5 years ago. Well, maybe we can start now because it looks like the CDC is finally being allowed, to study the gun issue and follow the data. And where will that data go? Well, we'll have to see. And I can imagine that Dana Loesch and the rest of the crew already have the hit piece videos already videoed. They're proactive that way, you must admit. Okay, well, speaking about being proactive, the suicide bomber in Austin apparently was a troubled kid, very troubled. Yes, I guess he would be troubled. He's also a terrorist. And also white. So maybe that's why the moniker of terrorist is so difficult to apply in that case. But the use of the surveillance state was able to track this terrorist down and confront him and at least attempt to take him into custody before, he suicided himself. There was also another incident of the surveillance state. This one turned out in a tragedy. Sacramento, California. There was a call of somebody breaking into homes in a particular neighborhood. And the Sacramento police flew either a helicopter or a drone. It was the video that they showed was an infrared for heat signature. Flew this drone or helicopter over the neighborhood and saw somebody lurking about in a backyard. And so the cops on the ground were directed to that backyard. They decided to just go through that backyard. Let's not knock on the front door. Confronted the person in the backyard, and when that person in the backyard didn't comply fast enough, they plugged him 20 times and killed him. Oh, he was the grandson living there talking on his phone. Surveillance state saw a heat signature of someone in a backyard. I thought a man's home was his castle, except when you're black and cops mistakenly shoot your grandson 20 times. Now, of course, we are going to hear all of the attendant victim blaming. They're going to bring out every aspect about this 22-year-old kid's life. If he was ever kicked out of school for any reason, if he got into a fight, if he had smoked pot. Because the surveillance state can show us all of that, and then we can make a decision about whether a person deserved to live or die, regardless if he was just innocently sitting in his grandparents' backyard talking on the phone. Well, what's on the rest of the menu today? Oh, let me say one other thing about the Austin suicide bomber. They're still having a hard time trying to figure out what the guy's motive was. They can't be that droll. I mean, within minutes after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, the cops had a whole scenario of stolen cigarillos and black defiance to show that that was his motivation for not complying with the cops, and therefore they had to shoot him in the back. And they did. Within minutes, they had a whole scenario. Video. The suicide bomber essentially gave a confession on his cell phone, taking credit for the 7 bombings. That would include the one that he blew himself up with, 7 bombs. Had a list. The cops have discovered a list of other addresses he was going to go to. Now, we already know that the first part of the bombing where people were killed and maimed were directed at black people. The others blew up in delivery facilities. And I got to tell you, those bombs are going to prominent people of color, too. And even though the cops won't tell us that what's on the list is a list of prominent people of color, probably mostly black, it's really hard to figure out what that motivation of that suicide bomber was, isn't it now? Okay, what's on the rest of the menu? Trump and his businesses are rife with conflicts of interest, and the Republican Party is in on it. Well, yeah, I mean, if there's a grifter gravy train, they're going to get on it right now, and they do. Trump staffers personally intervened to cover up how much the proposed tip-sharing rule would cost. And GOP staffers embroiled in the Cambridge Analytica scandal whine about being unfairly targeted. Well, when you lay down with dogs, you know what they say. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the West Virginia teachers' strike awakened the sleeping giant of labor activism for teachers across the country. And France puts the United States to shame with its proposed new legislation defending women. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com. On the rightish of the page on the bottom there, it is our chat room link, and Roaring Girl takes care of that throughout the day, and you can leave us messages of concern, requests, or whatnot there. Or you could also simply follow us and contact us through our Twitter feed at Netroots Radio. I don't know. You could go to Facebook. We wouldn't ever, require it, or even, I don't know, I guess I'm suggesting it by mentioning it, but you make a decision about Facebook. And I can be followed on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I also post a diary of show notes, links, and other entertaining items for your perusal at Daily Co's, and all show notes and links can be found there, as well as links to Francis Livings, who has provided the music for West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Podcasts of the show can be had initially by way of Spreaker, and then it emanates out to Stitcher, TuneIn. There's a YouTube channel that's going there. You'll have to look that up on Netroots Radio, I think, or maybe it show up at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I should figure that out. And other fine platforms where other great podcasts can be found, mixed in with, very mediocre ones too. So, and I don't know, I'm somewhere in there, mediocre to great. There's quite a range, I must say. Still haven't heard from iTunes, and so hopefully I'll be on their registry soon. Okay. So, conflicts of interest with the Trump empire, and the Republican National Committee is, enabling, or are they making money too? I think it's a bit of both. You pay tribute if you're an earner. This is what it's all about, okay? Well, the RNC has mysteriously spent over $270,000 at Trump properties in just 1 month. Just 1 month. Well, Trump has been using the Oval Office to enrich himself since day one, and the RNC is helping him out. Matthew Chapman of Share Blue Media has penned this piece. According to a new report in the Washington Post, the RNC's Federal Election Commission filing shows it shelled out $271K in expenses at Trump properties just in the month of February. And I have to say, February is the shortest month of the year. Because Trump never divested from his business, when Trump properties make money, so does he. And you know what's weird? When his properties don't make money, he still makes money. It's like the perfect loop. He's in like Flynn. Most of the RNC's cash, $205,000, was spent at the Trump National Doral, Miami. Well, there's a really good golf course there. I mean, they used to have the Doral Open. Yes, and the combined total comprised 86% of the RNC's February expenses that were categorized specifically as venue rental and catering. Wow. I got to get in on that catering business. I used to. But I don't think Trump properties are going to allow a chef like me on, their property. Because we actually, don't cut corners and keep the food at the proper temperature at all times. And I never failed and got anything below a 99% on my health report. So there you go. And if you work for a Trump property, it's expected that you fail your health reports on a consistent basis. Really. So I couldn't have catered on his properties. I wouldn't have qualified for their, I don't know what to call it. Republican politicians and interest groups have rented out Trump properties on a regular basis over the year, netting $160,000 for the Trump organization. Now, the RNC has declined to comment on what exactly venue rental and catering expenses were specifically for. And why would they? I mean, Citizens United. You don't have to tell anybody anything. Just, money talks. Well, actually, money swears. But it certainly has a First Amendment right to tell you how you're going to live your life. And foreign governments are also spending at the properties in a transparent attempt to curry favor with Trump. One former Mexican ambassador claimed the State Department itself encourages foreign diplomats to do so. Well, there's a new sheriff in town, and he expects the tribute, if you know what I mean. Amid allegations that these kinds of payments violate the Constitution, the Trump organization said it would donate foreign profits, but has offered few details. I think it's going in the same account as the donations for veterans groups. Trump promised at the start of his presidency to divest from his business ventures, but he never did. While his 2 adult sons are ostensibly in charge of running the family business now, they have done nothing to ameliorate financial conflicts. Are you kidding me? Ameliorate? They only know how to, make them more complex and illegal. Trump's flagrant disregard of ethics to mix the government's business with his personal profits has been increasingly disturbing, only disturbing to people who, figure that we're a nation of laws. That the Republican Party is cheerfully complicit in enriching Trump while he holds the highest office in the land is immeasurably worse. Well, Trump's their man. They've been doing this for a long, long time. this next offering here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. An offering by Alan Pike out of Think Progress. Not only have Trump staffers personally intervened to cover up how much this proposed tip-sharing rule would cost, but Mick Mulvaney himself signed off on a scheme to simply delete inconvenient figures from a key report. Well, that's what's known, I believe, as creative financing. Mm-hmm. A Trump administration policy that could cheat food service workers out of hundreds of millions of dollars in income. I don't think it's for, one service worker. I think it's for a lot. Was knowingly misrepresented by White House leaders over the objections of career staffers, casting doubt on the reliability of the facts and figures Trump's team uses to push for policies that affect millions of people's lives. Staff in the White House's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs insisted that an announcement of changes to tip worker pay rules should include their professional estimates of the potential downside for workers. When Labor Secretary Alex Acosta disagreed and moved to delete the bad news from the administration's paperwork, the agency head, Naomi Rao, tried to block the now incomplete regulation from moving forward. Insubordinate staff. Rao's staff wanted the rule to include an official estimate of how much worker pay could end up diverted to managers under the proposal. $640 million, a much lower figure than the billions that Acosta's own staff had reportedly found in their earlier calculations. But if you try to rewrite pay rules in the food sector, $640 million in legalized pilfering is still a lot to swallow. Better to get that down, or better still, make it invisible. Acosta then turned to Mick Mulvaney because he's the troll under the bridge. He can make magic. And he's currently serving double duty atop the Office of Management and Budget and at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Well, Mulvaney has groomed a public image as a teller of hard truths and master of wonky details over his years in Washington. But in this instance, he sided with Acosta and ordered the inconvenient figures just be dumped down the old memory hole. The story is a classic example of ideology trumping fact. There may be good reasons to revive the old tip-sharing pools that Obama-era regulations constrained, but waves of analysis of the Acosta proposal had found that unscrupulous managers and owners would be able to include themselves in these tip pools, effectively siphoning off a large chunk of frontline workers' pay to their own pockets. And I got to tell you, I've seen it all in the food industry, hospitality business, from owning my own establishments all the way down to being, the lowly dishwasher or bus boy, whatever is the lowly part. Because I got to tell you, the bus boys and the dishwashers, the restaurant doesn't exist without those guys and gals. But the idea of management and ownership taking the workers' tips, because I got to tell you, those that do that also charge their workers for their meals, for their uniform. There's going to be some sort of uniform that they have to get, and you can only get it from them, and you got to pay for it. Oh, it's okay. We'll take it out of your pay. So after taxes and all these other, living in the company town, working at the company store, when your paycheck comes, you got nothing. It's all been eaten up by taxes and all these other service fees that the management has imposed upon you. And they're then going to take your tips, too, which is what you live on. Okay. I guess the lesson there is don't continue working at that job. It's not meant to be nice and good. It's meant to be hard so you can go on to do something better with your lives. Well, let me tell you, when I was going to school, I waited tables and I tended bar because, that's what you do when you go into school. And I also have to say, when I was swinging a hammer with my buddies, trying to, turn a property around, I always tended bar, even during the days I was working. Those nights I'd tend bar, and it's because I needed cash. Who doesn't? So, Mick Mulvaney, just being able to make estimates and numbers disappear. And this is what's happening when they deconstruct the administrative state. It's not, a bug in the system. It's an actual feature. They don't want any of the government's estimates, numbers, or any of this to be trusted. It's all to be suspect. Finishing up here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, is an article out of Raw Story by Noor Al-Sabai. Now, GOP staffers, and we're talking about GOP staffers across many, many campaigns, GOP staffers in congressional offices, Senate offices, GOP staffers in state offices, city offices, county offices, are all whining that we're the victims. Oh, my God. Okay, so in light of the most recent reports of shadowy data acquisition practices by British political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, staffers who worked on GOP campaigns that hired the company are playing the victim. Aides to Republican campaigns that used Cambridge Analytica believe that they've been unfairly dragged into the firm's most recent scandal. Last week, former Cambridge Analytica employee Christopher Nix revealed that the extent of the company's misuse of Facebook data. One former high-ranking Republican staffer said, "We're the victims here." Then they went on to say that they were unaware of the company's practice as much as the rest of the country. Except there were a lot of us who, sounded the alarm. But don't listen to us. I mean, you never do. I'm sorry. I'm part of the left. We've been right on everything since, before your great-grandparents were born. Okay, so the company which formerly employed ex-White House aide Steve Bannon, before he left to lead the Trump campaign, did work for the presidential campaigns of Senator Ted Cruz, HUD Secretary Ben Carson. Now, let's be clear. Cambridge Analytica has been known to employ dirty tricks since 2015, when The Guardian published an expose on it, and we were right there. I'm just telling you. I mean, it's all the news that's fit to read here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, folks. Now, because increasingly severe allegations against the company were public knowledge during the 2016 election, Republican candidates who previously employed Cambridge Analytica have come under fire for using its data. Earlier this week, Cruz was criticized by the Texas Democratic Party for using the company 6 months following initial revelations about the nefarious means by which they acquired psychographic profiles on voters. A campaign would have to be a special kind of stupid to knowingly and willingly engage a vendor that had a hint of impropriety, a source who spoke on condition of being anonymous said. And that's clearly not the case with these campaigns, because they knew it worked, and they wanted in, and they figured no one would find out. But, we are a democratic institution. Let's get to our break, and we'll come back and go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Steve Mirsky.
Legislation to restrict the current overuse, I would say abuse, of antibiotics by farmers who raise livestock for human consumption.
Louise Slaughter, member of Congress from upstate New York in 2009 on the floor of the House. Slaughter died March 16th. She was 88 and the oldest current member of Congress at the time of her death. More of her 2009 remarks.
We have legislation that has strong and growing number of supporters who, like me, worry that the use of non-therapeutic antibiotics in our food supply poses an enormous and growing health risk for all Americans. And I hope all my colleagues will be with us when we take up the Preservation of Antibiotics for the Medical Treatment Act.
Slaughter grew up in Kentucky and received a bachelor's degree in microbiology and a master's in public health, both from the University of Kentucky. She repeatedly introduced legislation to cut down the overuse of antibiotics to promote animal growth, a factor in driving the development of antibiotic-resistant disease. Maren McKenna talked to me about Slaughter last fall when McKenna's book Big Chicken came out.
Every term, she brings forth a bill that is known as PAMTA, the Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act, that would remove from agriculture any antibiotic that is also used in human medicine. And every year, the bill doesn't even get as far as hearings. And every year she brings it back again. She is indefatigable.
Despite the failure to pass the legislation, Slaughter's attention to the issue played a role in the decision by various agricultural enterprises to voluntarily cut their use of non-veterinary antibiotics in recent years. You can hear more about that development on the podcast with McKenna on the Scientific American website. Slaughter proposed additional legislation to protect the food supply in general. She was the driving force behind the 2008 Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which prevents insurance companies and employers from using genetic predispositions to discriminate. She was also a leader behind the 1994 passage of the Violence Against Women Act, which funded shelters and educational programs. She was in her 16th term in Congress when she died.
Let's start taking the steps to make sure our food supply is safe as it can be.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Steve Mirsky.
Welcome to 60-Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. In Federalist 51, James Madison offered what is perhaps the best explanation of a system of government based on separation of powers that has ever been written. Acknowledging that if men were angels, no government would be needed, Madison argued that any government administered by men over men must be so constituted so as to control itself as well as the governed. The electoral process provided a primary means of controlling government, but auxiliary precautions were also needed. The Constitution would provide these precautions by so constituting the national government in its separate branches as to discourage the abuse of power. A system of checks and balances, Madison believed, would give to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means and personal motives to resist encroachments of the others. A president, for example, would have both the necessary powers and the self-interest to resist encroachments from the legislature or judiciary. Similarly, Congress and the Supreme Court would combine personal motives and constitutional powers to resist any intrusion by the other branches. Ambition, Madison declared, must be made to counteract ambition. That's all for today's podcast, 60-Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, And this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1854. That was the day that the founders of what became the Republican Party met in Ripon, Wisconsin. The idea was to form a new party, opposed to the Southern labor system based on slavery. That July, the Republicans held their first convention in Michigan. Their motto became free soil, free labor, free men. But as historian Eric Foner has explained, proclaiming the superiority of free labor was easy. Implementing that vision proved more troublesome. Women and free black residents living in the North often found it difficult, if not impossible, to find safe, good-paying jobs in the so-called free labor system. 2 years after the new party was founded, Republicans ran their first presidential candidate, John C. Fremont. Fremont was a military man, explorer, and map maker of the American West. He carried 11 northern states, but failed to win the presidency. The next election, Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln won 18 northern states, and for the first time, a Republican sat in the White House. With the victory of a free labor candidate, the country stood on the brink of civil war. The question of slave labor would be settled on the battlefield. In his first address to Congress, President Lincoln declared, "Labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could have never existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration." Given the thoughts of the first Republican president, could you imagine a leader in the Republican Party making such a statement today?
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on Wednesday, March 21st, 2018. I'm Mark Boulanger. Labor unions are warning that a huge trade deal being negotiated in secret will lead to more corporate control of the global economy, perilous jobs, and a disconnect between employers and their workers. The Trade and Services Agreement, TISA, is being negotiated by 21 governments plus the European Union. If implemented, it would cover 70% of the world's trade and services. To alert people about the dangers of TISA, the global union IUF commissioned a report on the agreement. IUF represents some 2.5 million workers around the world who are employed in food industries, agriculture, hotels, and other sectors. I talked to Jane Kelsey about the report she wrote for the IUF. Dr. Kelsey is a professor of law at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. In her report, she discusses the rise of digital platforms such as Amazon and Facebook and how TISA would give them even more influence on global trade.
People often refer now to the fourth industrial revolution. You know, we had the old development of the Fordist factory system in the past. Now we have another revolution that is changing the way that capitalism operates, and it's conducted through the digital domain. If we think about the way that people are even working in a basic factory or a distribution centre, increasingly we see artificial intelligence, we see computer systems operating, how work is done, how workers are monitored. But we see also that labour replacement is happening, and when labour is replaced, new jobs that might come in are actually the skilled tech jobs. They're not the jobs of people who are displaced from the factory floor. But at the other end of if we just talk about the food supply chain, if we look at the impact of entities like Uber and Uber Eats, or we look at Airbnb and the operations of the accommodation sector and so on, we see that we have digital platforms where the workers are supposedly self-employed. They're not employed any longer by the actual operator of the business. and therefore the Ubers or the Airbnbs take no responsibility for the compliance with the labour laws, providing for health and safety, providing for pensions, providing for compliance with minimum wages and so on. The individual workers are thrown back onto themselves as supposedly self-employed, even though they don't control the nature of the workplace at all. And so we have fundamental shifts occurring under this so-called fourth industrial revolution in the way that work is organised, in the way that employment relationships occur, and in the very nature of work. And that affects how workers and unions can bargain. If you are operating with a notional employer from offshore, how do you bargain with them? Who is the employer? And so that's why the digitization is so important. Team TISA, the biggest group of corporations pushing for these rules to be unrestricted in the future, to have seamless global operations, are actually the big tech companies. Capitalism has always been a battle over power, especially a battle between capital and labour. And as we've seen over the neoliberal period of the last 30 to 40 years, the imbalances there have intensified. What TISA seeks to do is to stretch that imbalance even further.
An extended version of my interview with Dr. Kelsey is available on the Radio Labour website at www.radiolabor.net. And that's it. International labor news you can use. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The European Union has unveiled a proposed tax overhaul aimed at increasing tax revenues from multinational tech firms like Apple and Google.
The digital sector is booming. It's fast catching up with the traditional economy. But tax rules haven't kept pace.
That's Pierre Moscovici, the EU's Commissioner for Taxation and Customs.
Many digital companies benefit from public services without paying their fair share of tax.
At the heart of the proposed tax rules is a new tax on digital activities that would enable EU countries to, quote, tax profits that are generated in their territory even if a company does not have a physical presence there. The EU would measure a company's digital presence by its in-country revenues, or if more than 100,000 people use a digital product in a given country, say Google Cloud subscribers. George Turner is a researcher at the UK-based Tax Justice Network and says the proposed tax reforms get at a major problem about how business is done in the 21st century.
The problem with digital companies is that they can kind of choose to locate their profits very easily anywhere in the world because a lot of their activity is done online.
Take Ireland, which in recent years allowed Apple to funnel its profits through the country and then offshore to Bermuda. Apple ended up paying far less in taxes than if its revenues were tallied up and taxed in individual European countries. It's possible Ireland and other countries with similar schemes could oppose the new EU reforms, but Turner says most European countries should welcome the return to a level tax playing field.
What's happened is countries have been pitted against each other by these multinational companies, and that led to a race to the bottom. And you can win a race to the bottom, but you don't win much.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us to the Chef's Table here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is our daily special. I do spice it up. It's not quite jambalaya, but you'll know what I mean. It's not, some people call it fusion, but all American food is fusion. It came from somewhere, didn't it? It did. Okay, even the Jell-O mold, I'm just warning you, aspic. Before Jell-O, there were aspics. Okay, so since we are at the chef's table, and we like to begin with weather from around the world, and then, of course, we always begin along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 42 degrees. We're going to be a bit cooler today with a high of 49, and it is raining as we speak. And it is. It specifies it is truly a rain shower. And we will be raining most of the day, it looks like. Quite a bit of what they call airborne river of water. And it's made its way to us. And let's see. Right now, the winds are out of the south-southwest at about 4 to 6 miles an hour. They will be increasing to 15 to 25 miles per hour later, coming out of the west. Then tonight, they're expecting a low of 37. And, during the day, we're going to get about a quarter inch of rain with another quarter inch of rain tonight. Winds will be out of the south-southeast at 10 to 15 miles per hour. And then tomorrow, we're expecting over an inch of rain. And the winds will be out of the southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So we got that to look forward to. On the other hand, it's not snow, at least where I'm at. Though, I must say, the freezing level will be dropping to about 1,000 feet, and I am above that. So I think we will be getting snow. Okay, well, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. Okay, London is 49 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 48 and cloudy. Of course, they say Paris. Rome is 52 and sunny. They, of course, say Roma. Kiev is 36 and fair with a loud motor of a big old truck in the background. Kabul is 60 degrees with thunder in the vicinity. Hong Kong, 61 and clear. Tokyo, 54 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia, 68 and cloudy. San Francisco, California, 57 with, they have that airborne river of rain coming through them too. And lots of rain. And New York is 38 degrees and mostly cloudy. And a weather advisory because you have a lot of snow in your area too. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people live around the world. Okay, starting off here at the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursday is an article out of Alternet by Ilana Novik. And I got to tell you, I think GOP governors and others in authority, because they certainly believe they are in authority, I think that some of their more learned members are muttering among themselves that what happened in West Virginia with the teacher strike there they fear that they've awakened a sleeping giant. Indeed. Well, this recent strike inspired teachers from other states to fight for better pay, better health and retirement benefits, and improved conditions. Working conditions. Well, of course. One of those great working conditions probably is so that, they don't run out of paper. And that's one of the complaints about the kids at Parkland. They go, now wait a second. You can't fund us enough so that we don't run out of paper, and now you want to be able to fund armed guards for our school. And I just got to tell the kids, when you get a little bit older, you'll see where the priorities are. And the kids say, hey, Holden Caulfield lives in every young person throughout all generations, and we know hypocrisy when we see it, and we're finally attuned to adult hypocrisy. Arizona teachers started Red for Ed, a campaign in which teachers lobbying for a pay raise wear red to protest outside the state capitol in Phoenix. In just 2 weeks, Arizona Educators United has attracted more than 34,000 members. You thought that the labor movement was dead? But like a monster, it comes back to life. In Kentucky, 5 districts are closing Wednesday to attend a rally in Frankfort to protest Senate Bill 1. Now, that's Frankfort, Kentucky, not Germany, of course. Now, that Senate Bill 1 they are protesting would hurt teachers' retirement benefits, ending traditional pensions for future teachers and cutting the cost of living benefits for those currently retired. Governor Matt Bevin is already under fire for calling teachers who oppose the bill ignorant and selfish. And I got to say, that's pretty rich coming from Bevin, because you got to be a special ignorant and kind of selfish to top him. Oklahoma teachers, however, may be closest to following West Virginia's footsteps. Teachers in the state have told the state legislature that they have until April 1st to give teachers their first pay raise in 10 years or they will strike. April Fools. No, they mean business. And they'll show who's the April Fool on that day. Their livelihoods depend on it. Mary Best, a classroom teacher for 33 years and now president of the Oklahoma chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, said that since 2008, Oklahoma has led the nation in cuts to education at 23.6%. Student enrollment has steadily increased, but funding has decreased. That's how, well, obviously she doesn't know how to run a business. Okay, momentum for a teacher walkout has been growing since the failure of the Oklahoma legislature to pass a pay raise. She continued, like in West Virginia and Arizona, she believes social media will move the action. A Facebook group, be careful now. Oklahoma teacher walkout, the time has now emerged and fueled the movement. The group grew to over 40,000 in the first weekend, and the group currently has 69,000 members. Well, geez, it's almost like teachers are people, too. How dare they? Okay, union leaders agree that West Virginia's strike and the protests in Oklahoma, Arizona, and Kentucky is a good sign for labor unions and teachers' unions, especially going forward. Best said she does think that the tide is turning. Teachers are tired of salaries that have not kept pace with other professions. Public support for teachers could impact the upcoming midterm elections. We're going to be pushing from this time forward that there is a direct correlation between who is in office and what's going on in funding for public schools. If a candidate says they support public schools and then votes a different way, then we need to make a change of the ballot box, union leaders said.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers. c'est tout.
Okay, finishing up here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy at the chef's table. And we'll probably be struggling with the town street sweeper, but I'm not going to fight him. Okay, I'd let him do his job because it keeps the storm drains clean, and since we do have a downpour, it's very important. Liz Posner out of Alternate finishes up with us today here at the chef's table. A new bill being considered by the French Parliament makes a bold move to fight sexual harassment, hitting men where it hurts the most, in their wallets. Close. Marlena Schiappa, the French gender equality minister, a government position dedicated to combating sexism, said that under this law, sexual harassers caught on the street would be subject to pay fines on the spot. The fines would range from about $110 to $920 U.S. and could be higher for repeat offenders or severe violations. The idea is that it is high enough to be a deterrent, but also that we could be sure the harasser can pay it immediately so that the law can be efficient, Schiappa said. Leave it to the gender equality minister to talk about efficiency now. Oh, well, this is going to hurt men where it hurts. If people don't modify their behavior on their own, sometimes the function of government is to step in and say, look, you got to be a good neighbor, and if you're not, we're going to have to put some money in the kitty. The proposed legislation will also extend to the statute of limitations for underage victims of rape by 10 years, as well as change the age of consent to 15. The push for a consent age change follows a well-publicized case in France in which a 22-year-old man was charged with rape after having sex with an 11-year-old girl. The man was acquitted last week. Nabokov was not a blueprint on how to behave. Let's make it clear. Now, Schiappa has been clear about her intention to tackle sexual harassment since she was first appointed to Emmanuel Macron's cabinet. It is a huge phenomenon in France, she said. It's that moment when a man is walking behind a woman, talking to her, and the woman can do nothing because she's alone. She doesn't scream for help because she thinks it's not that bad. I'll walk. I'll escape. Men then feel it's acceptable. They're just being the French lover. France is paradoxical, she continued. We are the country of Simone de Beauvoir, a feminist theory and philosopher, but we are also a Latin country with entrenched stereotypes. And the U.S. could stand to learn a lot from France's tough proposal to stem the tide of sexual harassment. Nearly 80% of American women say they've been sexually harassed or assaulted. And the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network estimates that every 98 seconds someone is sexually assaulted in the U.S. And that must stop. All right. I wouldn't say that it's more, but we have a better way of quantifying these instances, and so it's got to stop. And France looks like they're leading the way, and well, they should. I mean, if you ask them, they are the cradle of civilization. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, but we continue with broadcasting on Netroots Radio, some great live content throughout the day, where you'll be updated with breaking news as it happens. And visit with us tomorrow. It will be, it's Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we were all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Okay, why don't you visit with us tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.